Ordinary life does not interest me. I seek only the high moments. I'm in accord with the surrealist, searching for the marvelous. I want to be a writer who reminds others that these moments exist. I want to prove that there is infinite space, infinite meaning, infinite dimension. But I'm not always in what I call a state of grace. I have days of illuminations and fevers. I have days when the music in my head stops. Then I mend socks, prune trees, canned fruits, polish furniture. But while I'm doing this, I feel I am not living. And what I have to say is really distinct from the artist and art. It is the woman who has to speak, and it is not only the woman, Anaïs, who has to speak, but I have to speak for many women. As I discover myself, I feel I am merely one of many, a symbol. I begin to understand June, Jeanne, and many others, Georges Sand, Georgette Leblanc, Eleonora Duse, women of yesterday and today, the mute ones of the past, the inarticulate ones who took refuge behind wordless intuitions, and the women of today, all action and copies of men, and I in between. Here lies the personal overflow, the personal and feminine overfullness, feelings that are not for books, not for fiction, not for art, all that I want to enjoy, not transform. My life has been one long series of efforts, self-discipline, will. Here I can sketch, improvise, be free, and myself.
Today on Camera 3, a journey through a remarkable world, a world patiently constructed day by day over a lifetime. It's to be found in the diary of Anaïs Nin, and our guide and reader is the author herself. The diary totals now over 150 volumes and still being written. It records the odyssey, internal and external, of a little girl raised in Paris, daughter of the pianist-composer Joaquín Nin. Deeply wounded by her parents' separation when she was but 9, Anaïs was brought first to Spain and then to the United States. Rebelling against school in New York, interested only in literature, she began to read in the libraries, one volume after another, in alphabetical order for lack of any other guidance. She lived in the United States, then again in Europe. She began to write. Finding no interested publisher, she bought her own press and began printing her own books. Finally, she settled in Paris, in the new age of art and life that was to change the world. And it's there that this published volume of the journal begins, Paris, 1931. But first, it remembers the pain in which it began, the pain of the daughter deserted by her father.
I began to write the diary on the ship bringing us to America. At the age of 11, it was for my father, to tell him the story of my wanderings far from him. I tried to mail the diary volumes to him, but my mother would not let me, saying they might get lost. When I took communion at Mass, I imagined it was not Christ who visited me in this heart shaped like a room, but my father. I was aware that I had not only lost him, but a way of life, music, musicians, colorful visitors, prestige, a European life, as compared with life in America as an unknown, an immigrant, with drab and colorless friends, and my mother struggling to support us. I have kept this journal ever since, and I still carry it everywhere, writing on cafe tables while waiting for a friend, on the train, on the bus, in waiting rooms at the station, while my hair is washed, at the Sorbonne when the lectures get tedious, on journeys, trips, almost while people are talking. It is while cooking, gardening, walking, or love-making that I remember my childhood, and not while reading Freud's preface to a little girl's journal. Henry Miller teases me about my memory for conversation. Every now and then he says, "Put this down in your diary." He never says, as others do, "Do not put this down in your diary." But here in Paris, I am out. I'm always out, with everybody. Last night I did get sad in the beautiful Scheherazade nightclub with the wrong people, but I pinched myself. Allons donc, streets. You're on the street at last, walking along the crowded streets of Henry's crowded books. External and internal to be balanced, nurturing each other, or else the internal eats me like rust. Introspection almost devoured me. Henry saved me. He took me into the street. It is enough that a few hours ago I was obliged to think about my father in order to write about him. It is enough. Come Square Montelon, Boulevard Jean Jaurès, Rue Saint-Martin, like merry dice dancing in my empty head.
That Paris between the wars was a Paris of cafes and ateliers. A new generation of artists was basking in the confidence they had a new point of view. Hemingway had recorded the outer life of one world. Now Anaïs Nin was patiently weaving into her own story the inner life of another world. It included men like Antonin Artaud, the surrealist poet and actor, seen here as he appeared in the Carl Dreyer film, The Passion of Joan of Arc. Here, Henry Miller, who signed himself in this picture, the gangster author. Miller and Anaïs Nin exerted a powerful influence on each other in those years. He was working on the first version of Tropic of Cancer. They were just discovering what was to become a lifelong friendship that has lasted to this day.
Henry is like a mythical animal. His writing is flamboyant, torrential, chaotic, treacherous, and dangerous. Our age has need of violence, he says. I enjoy the power of his writing, the ugly, destructive, fearless, cathartic strength, the strange mixture of worship of life, enthusiasm, passionate interest in everything, energy, exuberance, laughter, and sudden destructive storms baffles me. Everything is blasted away. Hypocrisy, fear, pettiness, falsity. It is an assertion of instinct. He uses the first person, real names. He repudiates order and form and fiction itself. He writes in the uncoordinated way we feel, on various levels at once. Fred, Henry, other friends, and I at the cafe, talking, discussing, arguing, storytelling until the electric lights went out in the street. The night was dispersed, and a dim, shy, sienna-colored dawn entered the window. The dawn, I repeated. Henry thought it was the dawn itself which was a new experience. I could not explain what I felt. It was the first time I had not felt this compulsion to escape or to conceal myself. It was the first time I had abandoned myself to fraternity, exchange, confessions, without feeling suddenly the need to take flight. All night I had stayed there without experiencing that abrupt end to fusion, that sudden and painful consciousness of separation, or reaching ultimately and always the need of my own world again, the inability to remain outside, estranged at some moment or other from everyone. This had not happened. This dawn had come as a first break in the compulsion and tyranny of inadaptation. Yet I always longed to be a part of every intense, every joyous moment, every moment of life, longed to be the woman who was weeping or laughing, the woman who was being kissed amorously before everyone, the woman who was given a flower to wear, the woman who was being helped into the bus, the woman who was leaning out of a window, the one who was being married, the one who was giving birth. The hero of this book may be the soul, but it is an odyssey from the inner to the outer world, and it is Henry who is dispelling the fogs of shyness, of solitude, taking me through the street and keeping me in a cafe until dawn. Artaud is the surrealist whom the surrealists disavowed, the lean, ghostly figure who haunts the cafes but who is never seen at the counter, drinking or sitting among people, laughing. He is the drugged, contracted being who walks always alone, who is seeking to produce plays which are like scenes of torture. In the schoolroom of the Sorbonne, Artaud steps out on the platform and begins to talk about the theater and the plague. He asked me to sit on the front row. It seems to me that all he's asking for is intensity, a more heightened form of feeling and living. Is he trying to remind us that it was during the plague that so many marvelous works of art and theater came to be? Because, whipped by the fear of death, man seeks immortality, or to escape, or to surpass himself? But then, imperceptibly almost, Artaud let go of the thread we were following and began to act out dying by plague. No one quite knew when it began. To illustrate his conference, he was acting out an agony. La peste in French is so much more terrible than the plague in English. But no word could describe what Artaud acted on the platform of the Sorbonne. His face was contorted with anguish. One could see the perspiration dampening his hair. His eyes dilated. His muscles became cramped. His fingers struggled to retain their flexibility. He made one feel the parched and burning throat, the pains, the fever, the fire in the guts. He was in agony. He was screaming. He was delirious. He was enacting his own death, his own crucifixion. At first, people gasped, and then they began to laugh. Everyone was laughing. They hissed. Then, one by one, they began to leave noisily, talking, protesting. They banged the door as they left. But Artaud went on until the last gasp and stayed on the floor. And then, when the hall had emptied of all but his small group of friends, he walked straight up to me and kissed my hand. He asked me to go to the cafe with him. We walked out in a fine mist. We walked through the dark streets. He was hurt, wounded, baffled by the jeering. He spat out his anger. They always want to hear about. They want to hear an objective conference on the theater and the plague. And I want to give them the experience itself, the plague itself. So they will be terrified and awaken. I want to awaken them. They do not realize that they are dead. Their death is total, like deafness or blindness. This is agony that I portrayed. Mine, yes, and everyone who is alive. The death of Antonio Francisco Miralles in a hotel room, alone, of asthma. Miralles, my Spanish dancing teacher, who used to say to me, "Anaïs, I'm a simple man. My parents were shoemakers in a little village in the south of Spain. I was put to work in an iron factory where I handled heavy things and was on the way to becoming deformed by big muscles. But during my lunch hour, I danced. I wanted to be a dancer, and I practiced every day, every night. At night, I went to the gypsies' cabins and learned from them. I began to dance in cabarets, and today, look." He took out a cigarette case engraved with the names of all the famous Spanish dancers. "Today, I've been the partner of all these women. If you would come with me, we could be happy. I'm a simple man, but we could dance in all the cities of Europe. I am no longer young, but I have a lot of dancing in me yet. we could be happy. This merry-go-round turned and sang, and I imagined myself embarking on a dancing career with Miralles, dancing, which was so much like flying, from city to city, receiving praise, bouquets, joyous music at the center always, pleasure as colorful as the Spanish dresses, all red, orange, black and gold, gold and purple and red and white. Imagining like amnesia, forgetting who I was and where I was and why I could not do it, not knowing how to answer him so I would not hurt him, I said, I'm not strong enough.
A picture of Joaquín Nin, Anaïs' father, at the height of his fame as composer and pianist, when pictures like this were used as postcards. After 20 years, he reappeared in his daughter's life, ready at last to establish a relationship with her.
I sat waiting for my father, fully aware of his superficiality. The gate bell tinkles as in the cow fields of Switzerland. The big green iron gate is opened by Amelia, my father's American car, the one he wanted all his life, rolls in. My father is loaded with flowers which hide his face, and with a box containing a lilac vase. He's in a sincere mood, and no longer performing. He's still trying to discover our sameness. We create harmony, security, a shelter, a home, and then we chafe for adventure. Restless, vital, fearing to hurt others, to destroy others, but avid for life, renewals, evolutions. We are cowards before the goodness or loyalty of others, and yet people think we are tyrants. But my father and I know how enslaved we are by tenderness, devotion, pity, or the goodness of others, and chained. Renewal, said my father, could come from anyone, from a nobody. Like a parlor game in which questions are asked. What is your favorite flower, your favorite piece of music? My father was pacing up and down the long red-tiled floor of the studio, firing questions at me. What about religion? What about politics? What are your ideas on morals? And so exultant because I answered them as he wished me to. It is as if he had educated me. He says, we do not need to lie to each other. Always the same wish not to have to lie. But we will, of course, at the first sign of danger, of vulnerability or jealousy, of withdrawal, we will lie to make an illusory relationship a perfect one without wounds. He tells me you've become beautiful, lovely, that black hair and green eyes and red mouth. One sees that you've suffered, yet the face is smooth, placid. It was made beautiful by suffering. I was standing against the mantelpiece. He was looking at my hands. You have the same long, tapered hands of your grandmother. These hands run in the family. When your ancestor, the court painter who painted portraits of the kings and queens, of the aristocrats and the famous people, when they needed a model for refined hands, he painted in the hands of your great-grandmother. I pulled away my hand brusquely, hit the glass ball with the crystal fish and stones, and it broke, and the water ran down the mantelpiece to the floor. He had been saying, in June you must come to the Riviera with me. They will take you for my mistress. That will be delightful. I will say this is my daughter, and they will not believe me. He has created a personality. There's also a Spartan quality in him. He abstains from drink and overeating to remain slender. He lives with great discipline. He has a passion for perfection. Even his lies are to embellish, to improve on reality. There's no vice or decadence, a great luminosity, a wisdom and a joyousness. Strange how, living under my mother's totally opposite nature, I discovered by myself that same discipline, that Spartanism, wisdom, that love of harmony. How I spent my life developing myself, training myself, tutoring myself, setting myself difficult things to do, critical of my conduct, from childhood on. Just as if I had taken on my absent father's role, which was that of a perfectionist. Self-appointed tasks, self-created goals, the immense pride in my father. True, he did not love us humanly, for ourselves, just this reflection of himself in three human beings, reproducing him, continuing his attitudes. He loved us as his creations. It must have been painful for so willful a man to see this domination superseded by my mother, his children alienated by a different background, a foreign language, and influenced by America. He was overjoyed that although he was prevented from training us, our blood obeyed him. One child carried on my father's scientific interests, another his musicianship, and I his talent for living.
Ever since she had begun the diaries as a child, Anaïs Nin's introspection had intensified her life. She carried everywhere a book in which to write. There was a book in this basket she carried on a visit with her family to Coney Island during her brief school years in America. And a book on the chair in the next room while she posed at the age of 18 as photographer's model, as Cleopatra. Until when this picture was taken recently by photographer Marlis, the volumes filled a bank vault. In Paris in the 30s, this introspection drew Miss Nin to an interest in psychoanalysis, particularly the work of Otto Rank. And in her own way, she found herself analyzing that discipline and her reactions to it.
Perhaps because I felt that I was divided into three selves. One self lived in Louvciennes, had a Spanish maid, eats breakfast in bed, eats pheasants killed by Lanny, listens to the radio, gives orders to the gardener, pays her bills with checks, sits by an open fire, copies the diaries, and translates the second diary volume from French into English, dreams by the window, gets restless for heightened living. The second self is in Villa Sora, with Henry and Fred and a constant stream of people walking in and out. I peel potatoes, grind coffee French style, wrap books, drink out of chipped cups and glasses discarded in Louvciennes, wipe my hands with old towels left over from Louvciennes, walk down the cobblestone streets to market, repair the phonograph, because Henry is absolutely helpless in practical matters, take the bus, sit at cafes, talk a great deal about books and films, writing and writers, smoke a great deal and watch the invasion of people walking in and out of the place. Henry has made friends with all the neighbors, with de Maigret, who can come in by walking off his bedroom into his terrace and into Henry's balcony and down the ladder. He's made friends with a woman on the floor below who has lived in Greece, and with a photographer who lives on the ground floor. The third self wants to learn a profession so that she may always write as she believes, wants to help Rank make a new life because he helped her make a new life, and wants the unknown, always the unfamiliar. I finally promised to go to New York for 2 months. I feel 2 months are short in the span of eternity. But psychoanalysis did save me because it allowed the birth of the real me, a painful one for a woman, filled with dangers, for no one has ever loved an adventurous woman as they have loved adventurous men. I may not become a saint, but I am very full and very rich. I cannot install myself anywhere yet. I must climb dizzier heights. But I still love the relative, not the absolute, the cabbage and the warmth of a fire, Bach on the phonograph, and laughter and talk in the cafes, and a trunk packed for departure with copies of Tropic of Cancer, and Rank's last SOS, and the telephone ringing all day. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Miss Nin traveled to America again, but she did not stay long. She did not become an analyst, as she thought she might. She continued with her stories and novels. Cities of the Interior, Seduction of the Minotaur, Winter of Artifice, Collage, Under a Glass Bell, and many others. And she continued to write the journal.
The Diary of Anaïs Nin, 1931 to 1934, is published jointly by the Swallow Press and Harcourt, Brace and World.